these are very bare bones slides. They won't actually, you kind of have to listen to the recording to get all the information. Informal responses and not pretty slides. I just don't actually have time to do that. So the agreement is rough slides to try to answer your questions, as many as I can. And it's often the case that I get questions where I've addressed something related in a previous Q&A. So, periodically maybe worth going back to those. And also, I try to be careful about not addressing questions I'm not the right person to address. So a good example this time is there were a number of questions about grades 4 and 5, and that's really not my age group. So I'll leave those to other folks to answer. So the first one today is our position is mostly teaching MTSS intervention, and about 6 hours a week is allocated for coaching in our buildings. We are working with our upper district administration to increase our coaching time and reduce our time teaching intervention groups. Could you provide research supporting coaches spending most of their time working with coaching teachers? So before I turn to the next slide, I think we all agree intervention is really important and coaching is really important. And it's very uncomfortable. Feel like we have to make a decision, between those. So I want to acknowledge that. But in terms of answering the question with respect to research, I called on the great Dr. Susan Lallier to answer this one for us, and I'm just going to give you a minute to read her response. Okay, and later in the presentation, I'll talk about, or the Q&A, I'll talk about where this adds some challenges, but let's go on and read the rest here. So I'll just editorialize here that you kind of see where less is more in the sense that you don't want to diffuse, working on a whole bunch of different practices when you are given a position in your district or charter that causes you to have really limited coaching time. Because you do need a fair amount of coaching on any one practice to actually have the impact. And so recommending that you really think carefully about working with the teacher to identify a practice or goal, and then digging deep in that practice or goal until there's really change in practice. All right, and thank you again to Dr. Lallier for providing those answers. Okay, the next question is, we have assessments that we can use to monitor reading skills, for example, NWEA, Acadians, MSTEP, etc. But what ways can we progress monitor active self-regulation / executive skills? Do you have examples of how this part of the active view of reading can be assessed? So first of all, I'm only going to respond from the perspective of reading specific active self-regulation and executive skills. So there are lots of other aspects of self-regulation and executive skills that you may be concerned about. But for me, I'll just be speaking about reading specific executive skills. So first, I want to shift the question just a touch and just say we don't really need to formally progress monitor everything that's in the active self-regulation bubble if reading is progressing well. So this is really more about how to assess these when there's a need to do so. So just as a reminder, here's the active view of reading, and the portion of it that that the question is about is this green bubble here, active self-regulation. And of course, this bubble is more important and is not developmentally sooner. It's in this position as a reminder just because it influences and sort of coordinates all of these other things that are extremely important that you see here in the middle. So the first item in here is motivation and engagement. And just as a reminder, motivation and engagement is what's called instructionally malleable. It means that teachers can affect motivation and engagement. It's not actually something you're just born with or not born with. The research clearly shows that some teachers motivate children much more than other teachers do. And research clearly shows that if you do an intervention that is specifically designed to improve children's motivation, you can do that. Motivation can cause improvements in reading comprehension. That is, reading comprehension can get better because of motivation and engagement-oriented intervention. That's been shown in many studies. But also, motivation and engagement is affected by reading comprehension. That is, if you're better at reading comprehension, you tend to become more motivated and engaged. And it tends, so it's a two-way relationship. And so we would hope that nobody would make a mistake of thinking that, and you should definitely guard against this with your teachers, just trying to motivate kids is not going to be enough to make them good readers, right? You have to teach them to decode, you got to teach them to be fluent, et cetera, et cetera. It's just one piece of a very large pie. The reason motivation and engagement matters so much is reading is extremely hard cognitive work. There's so much going on in the brain during reading. It's one of the most complex tasks that humans engage in, and that's part of why you have to have motivation and engagement. And motivation and engagement is also important. And I know that this is currently not a very hot topic in the field, to put it mildly, but nonetheless, research is research. It is very hard to become a really strong reader without voluntarily choosing to read. Put another way, the amount of time that kids read in school is not enough for most people to become a really good reader. You have to choose to do it outside of school. And I think if you all saw some of the headlines from NAEP recently, it just continues to be the case that children in the US are reading less and less. They're just less and less interested in reading. Okay, so how would you learn about children's motivation and engagement? One way you can do it is by looking at whether children are choosing to read for fun. And if they're not choosing to read for fun, there's multiple reasons why they might not be doing so. So they may not be reading for fun outside of school because their reading skills are very low. So they're just, not wanting to engage in a task they're not very good at. But it also could be they're not choosing to read for fun after school because the term is illiteracy, but basically they have decent reading skills, but they're just not choosing reading as an activity. And here's a little bit of data that is from the Nations Report Card from NAEP that may be helpful to you to understand both of these scenarios. So this is how often are kids reading for fun on their own time, and again, these statistics are have been really shifting. A lot of people think with the advent of phones and social media and so forth, but they've really been shifting. But here what you see is kids who are scoring and reading below the 25th percentile. And this is how many of them say they're reading for fun. This is self-report, so keep that in mind, but say they're reading for fun almost every day. And the numbers, I think, here sort of line up with, some self-report bias. Anyway, let's skip on to that. And then here are students who are reading at or above the 75th percentile. So they're better readers, and a much higher percentage of them are saying that they read almost every day. But also, I want you to pay attention to this white area here. So 54% of kids who are pretty good readers from a, test perspective at least, are not choosing to read almost every day. So this is where we see that it is important to try to motivate all kids to read, including those who are struggling with reading and those who are not. So another tool or another sort of area is academic reading motivation. So that's not, do you read for fun, but basically, are you motivated and engaged when you're being asked to read in school? When you're reading for school tasks. And Teachers can certainly, again, use observational mechanisms here, but there are also surveys. One that you might be familiar with, I think it's still in Sharon Walpole's differentiated instruction or her assessment for reading instruction book, is the elementary reading attitude survey. And I've hyperlinked this here so you can take a look at it. It's also known as the Garfield. So if you've seen the one with the little Garfield cats, there's that. But another key aspect of kids' motivation and engagement is their self-efficacy as a reader. That means, like, do they think that they're a good reader? Do they think they can get better as a reader? Do they consider themselves a relatively good reader compared to peers and so forth? And here again, you can use observational mechanisms, but I've also linked here a survey that is validated called the Motivation to Read Profile that has some items that go up here and some items that are in self-perception. I wanted to share with you, this is from PEARLS, the Progress in International Reading Literacy Study, which is a study of literacy across many, many different countries. So when people are comparing US reading to reading of children in other nations, they're using this data, typically the PEARLS data. It's sort of the NAEP of the world, if you will, as opposed to the NAEP of the US. And so here are some questions from the student questionnaire in PEARLS. That also just, these have been validated as a cluster. And so these are also questions that you could use just to monitor where kids are and whether they've changed over time in their attitude toward reading or interest in reading. Okay, so the next item here is the executive function skills, and I think that was named specifically in the question, so I think the asker is particularly interested in those, as well as the whole active self-regulation bubble. So I asked Dr. Kelly Cartwright, who's an expert in this area, to respond to this question for us, and so I'll let you read her response. So again, you're going to get these slides. This is a link to a whole book actually on executive skills and reading comprehension that goes into instructional practices that can support children who are low in their reading specific executive function skills. But this article is just a shorter piece. I'm just clicking on it here so you can see it's a reader-friendly Literacy Today piece that just goes into the ways that you can assess and support executive function for reading. And that is hopefully a very direct answer to that question about how to assess those skills. So thank you to Dr. Kelly Cartwright for that. I hope that article is like not overwhelming and yet helpful to you in terms of thinking about assessment of that part of the bubble. And the last part of the bubble is strategy use. And you can see we have 3 kinds of strategies listed here with etc. Word recognition strategies, comprehension strategies, and vocabulary strategies. I'm just going to review here what are some desirable strategies in each of these areas. And none of this is going to be news to you all, but just always useful to, I think, to reground, reground ourselves in what we're looking for. So early on in children's reading development, decoding by individual letter is a desirable activity when we're at consonant, short vowel, consonant words or short vowel, consonant words. And then as children develop as readers, decoding by chunks in the word, right? When the words become multisyllabic and complex, we don't want to decode them individual letter by individual letter. And then decoding by analogy, which is when you use what you know from one word that you know how to read to figure out another word that you know how to read. That often involves morphology. Another desirable word recognition strategy is trying a different sound, also sometimes called flexibility, sometimes called vowel flexing. There is research on this it has positive effects on kids to teach them this strategy. And then rereading is also a strategy that children should be encouraged to do to try again. You know, if they've decoded the word and it didn't make sense, or they've decoded the word and they don't think they got it right, you know, trying again with that word is really important. For comprehension strategies, no time to give you an exhaustive list, but I want to highlight a couple. Comprehension monitoring is a really important strategy. You really need every child to be comprehension monitoring when they're reading, starting really from the very beginning. And you can look for a lot of different kinds of evidence of comprehension monitoring. If children do produce a nonsense word while they're reading, you know, they misdecode a word, that is, you know, if they stop, that tells us, oh, they're paying attention to their comprehension because they're noticing that they've misread a word, or at least it suggests they are. Stopping anytime a word doesn't sound right or doesn't make sense. So, you know, if they're reading along and they said, you know, the dog ran down and then they say sweet bun instead of sidewalk, you know, and they realize, oh, that doesn't make sense, then that would be a sign that they're monitoring comprehension. Another sign they're monitoring comprehension is self-correcting. Not always does that indicate your comprehension monitoring, but it usually does. That, you know, they've misread something, they've realized it doesn't sound right, and they've gone back and fixed it. And then obviously expressing confusion to their classmates, to you, even in their facial expression, is a sign that they're paying attention to their comprehension and realizing something doesn't make sense. Rereading is another sign, because why would you reread unless you either think you misdecoded a word or you think that you're not understanding what you read for whatever reason. Another example of a desirable comprehension strategy is visualizing. So when you all read narratives, novels, and the like, you likely visualize, most people do, and that can be helpful for children as well. And another desirable comprehension strategy you can be looking and listening for is summarizing. Our kids summarizing sort of as they go, and are they summarizing when they reach completion of what they're reading? And then the last category is vocabulary strategies. So how could you assess or look for those? You would be looking for, do kids even notice that a word meaning is unknown? I did some research a number of years back where I found that a fair number of children, young children, don't notice that they just read a word, or that a word was just read to them. This was a listening comprehension study, that they didn't know the meaning of. So there's that. Also, asking about word meaning. So if a child periodically is asking what a word means, that's a good sign that they're paying attention to vocabulary and using a strategy. Asking is a strategy. And then, you know, morphological or structural analysis is a really important vocabulary strategy. We really, really want readers doing this. Typically, second grade is around when I'm hoping to see this kind of analysis starting to happen in children, and certainly in third grade. And then the child using the context of the sentence to try to figure out what a word means, which may, you know, be looking for synonyms or explanations in the context of the sentence as well. So these are all desirable strategies. I realize that the questioner might have been looking for tests. You know, what are some tests I can use for kids' use of strategies? And although there are some surveys designed around comprehension strategies, at least, really these are areas that are best assessed by actually observing and listening to children. So unfortunately, you know, the vocabulary strategy test is not something we have as of yet. This one, our district administration is in favor of pulling reading interventions during science and social studies time. Can you share the research shared previously about why this is a hindrance to students for reading interventions during science and social studies? Also, if you have research to support when we should be pulling reading interventions, that would be great. I don't know of, and those of you who know me know if I don't know research on something, I just tell you. So I'm sorry to tell you, I don't know of any studies where they've like randomly assigned children to be pulled out of the literacy block versus to be pulled out of the science block, for example. So I don't know of that. Sorry. But we can extrapolate from some research, and I can explain why I don't recommend pulling children for reading intervention during science and social studies time. So one is that all children need a strong foundation in science and social studies. So the fact that a child is having difficulty with reading is no reason to not teach them basic citizenship skills, for example. I think we can all agree that with that. So that's one reason. A second reason, which you've probably already heard many, many times, if not from me, there folks, this is a big thrust in a lot of the science of reading advocacy that you're hearing out there, which is that knowledge is extremely important to reading comprehension. So a part of the day where we build knowledge is science and social studies. If we're pulling kids out of science and social studies for reading intervention, then we are really trying to create a short-term gain at the expense of a long-term gain because you need knowledge for reading comprehension, content knowledge. So when do I recommend pulling children for reading intervention? I recommend doing it during small group reading instruction time or small group literacy instruction time when the child's not with the teacher. So you have a whole group lesson and then kids are off doing the things that they need to do on their own while the teacher's pulling small groups. That's a good time because we, generally speaking, not much beats a teacher. So having time with that teacher is really an important, piece of the child's day. Having time where they're working independently or with a partner can be valuable, but is probably not going to be as valuable as reading intervention. So that's my recommendation. Now, I recognize that this is a really significant scheduling challenge. For example, most teachers do not want to teach literacy in the afternoon. So then your interventionists end up all morning, being very, very packed. And then in the afternoon, not so packed. I also realize that this is challenging for those of you who are not full-time coaches, trying to schedule your coaching and your intervention all for the literacy block. So I do get that. There isn't sort of an easy answer, unfortunately, to that conundrum, but I think as much as you can prioritize doing it during this time, that is the best. And then the second best is really any other time of the day when the kid is not working with a teacher, like when the child is doing individual work, paired work, and partner work. I also want to remind us that after school and summer provide really powerful additional options. I know that I have addressed in previous Q&As or somewhere, I don't know why I don't think that win time, what I need time or a set aside enrichment block, why I think that's not the answer. I know it's very popular right now, but so I think you'll be able to find that in previous Q&As or slides, but just in brief, the main reason is that it takes up another block of time in the school day, which means even less time for science and social studies, which is a problem, but I was just sharing. Okay, sorry for the, I know it's a little intense, but especially today, only 45 minutes, so here we go. Could you elaborate more on the significance of a knowledge building curriculum? I would appreciate it if you could include relevant research studies. Specifically, how does this approach impact student learning and long-term retention in high poverty, high performing schools? And the question asker, and by the way, I forgot to say, thank you for all these great questions. The question asker, pointed out that their teachers are really feeling good about their current basal reading curriculum and aren't too enthusiastic about, it seems, moving into a knowledge-based curriculum. Okay, so I think the first thing I would say is it's helpful to interrogate, what teachers are feeling is working in the current basal reading program. And to use assessment results to kind of go deeper with that perception. In terms of specifically, how does this approach impact student learning and long-term retention in high poverty, high performing schools? I would say we don't have that answer yet. We don't have much in the way of longitudinal studies of the impact of knowledge building curriculum. But what do we have? We have shorter term evidence, studies that are done within a year's time, a year of instruction, that suggest that when we have knowledge focused science curricula and we integrate literacy, that has positive effects on children's reading comprehension as well as their science. This is a link to a book that has a sort of reader-friendly review, a reader-friendly review in section 2 on that for science. And then for social studies, I have a collection of research articles and other papers that you can look at that speak to social studies. So for sure, when we embed literacy in science and social studies, we can see positive effects for kids. And we don't have as much of that sort of on the flip side yet, but there is some research, again, shorter term evidence, and I've linked a sample study here for you of benefits of knowledge building in our ELA curricula. So having our ELA curricula organized not around really loose themes or the like traditional basal readers, but around very specific content understandings, such as like how do animals adapt to their habitats and that kind of thing. So overall, I would say that our best guess based on the research to date is in fact that knowledge building curricula can be really powerful for children, not only in building knowledge, but also in building reading comprehension. And so I would encourage all of you to be, looking seriously at such curricula. And a last recommendation that I have on this is just just kind of loops back to the question about motivation and engagement from earlier, but anecdotally, there are a lot of folks who feel that children are more motivated and engaged when they're in a knowledge-rich ELA curriculum. And there is some research to suggest that. For example, research on CORI, or concept-oriented reading instruction, suggests that having a more knowledge-rich curriculum is more motivating and engaging for kids. You can also do simulations with teachers to understand why knowledge is so important to reading comprehension and writing. And you all have been through, not you all, many of you have been through such simulations with me, or probably as part of, I think Letters has such a simulation in it, where you basically see how hard it is for you to read and comprehend something when you don't know you don't have the requisite content knowledge. Okay, so when you don't know the stuff the author is assuming you know. So those simulations, doing those with teachers could be really helpful. And you can do the same thing in writing, engaging teachers in the process of trying to write something when you don't know much about the topic. So those are 2 recommendations. And finally, I'm on the advisory board of the Knowledge Matters campaign. So certainly just wanted to give a plug for some of the resources there. They might be useful for working with teachers. For example, there are videos of children in knowledge-rich classrooms that are using knowledge-rich ELA curricula. Okay. The next question is, there are not many quality decodable books that are nonfiction for early readers, and some teachers will only put books in students' hands during the partial alphabetic phase that are decodable. How do you balance the need for nonfiction reading even at this age and beyond read aloud with the books that are not yet decodable as far as print is concerned? So I think the question asker is correct. I don't know of research on this particular area of what percentage of decodable texts in a typical program are nonfiction, but my guess is that it is in fact not 50-50. And so I think they're right. And one thing that tells us is why the response to my previous question is so important, right? When children are at early stages of reading and they're not going to be learning a lot of content from the books they're reading, it's even more important to have a knowledge-rich approach to our read alouds and to our other parts of the day. But the longer answer is that there are ways that we can try to lift up the nonfiction text that we do have for early readers to read, and that we can use instructional practices like discussion and other written material to deepen the learning with those books. So I'm going to give you examples from 2 kindergarten books that are written to be decodable, among many other important features, just so you can see. So this is from our Great First Aid curriculum, so it's not, this isn't a book that most of you will access. So I'm so so I can't give you the link to the book, but I'm just going to give you a couple pages to show you what it so if the child were reading, you can see that this is decodable for a kindergarten reader. It is a sun. And then they turn the page to see the picture, and here's the picture. And if you were in your science, for example, working on observation skills, you could, revisit this photograph and have children engage in doing some careful observation. You could reinforce, if you've recently taught vocabulary on forest, you could reinforce that orally and so forth. So even though the words don't give us a lot to work with, the illustration and connecting to other parts of the day could. Similarly, it is a big bug. You can imagine engaging children in using their observation skills here. You could imagine, talking with children about the text feature of a close-up and so on. Here's another book to give an example more on the social studies side of the equation. This is a book, a decodable text for kindergartners about Jackie Robinson, or it's based on Jackie Robinson's life. The actual words in the book are, not very sophisticated, so there's not a lot of content knowledge being conveyed. But the book has an introduction, and you will find this in some decodable texts, that they're using the introduction as a way to build children's knowledge, even though the actual pages of the book, don't offer a lot of knowledge building opportunities. Okay, so those are 2 just examples for you. Just to sum up then, you're using things like introductions, like digging in deeply to photographs, and to connecting the text to other parts of the day and other things kids are learning, to get a little bit more out of the nonfiction decodable text that you have. Okay. And the nonfiction and fiction text that you have. Okay, the next question is, what are some research articles, recommendations, professional advice on supporting teachers around the use of AI when planning interactive read-alouds? And I'm assuming that that AI here means artificial intelligence. I am super sorry if AI is actually a program that I don't know or some other thing, but I think that they meant artificial intelligence. And so the short answer again is I don't know of any research on this. So that's the short answer. But the less short answer is that I went ahead and used AI to generate an interactive read aloud lesson plan. I chose to use it, Sylvester and the Magic Pebble, in my question to ChatGPT. That's a popular primary grade read aloud. I figure you're probably familiar with it, and lots of rich opportunities. And so I asked it to provide an interactive read aloud lesson with Sylvester the Magic Pebble, and then I analyzed the lesson plan to see how I could respond to your question. And I have a link to the lesson plan in the slide deck, so you can look at it yourself. I think you put that in there. But anyway, if you read through, and we don't have time to do that in great depth, but if you read through, what you'll see is that some of it, let me back up and just say, it's amazing, right? It's absolutely amazing that you can ask this AI to write a lesson plan, and it's really not that bad, So I want to say that, but think that you'll agree with me that it is problematic. Let's just dig into one of the things that was most problematic in my perspective. So in the book introduction, one of the questions is, what would you do if you had a magic pebble? So that, as you know, is not a text dependent question, right? You don't have to understand the book to answer that question. You don't, the book doesn't um, provide the answer to that question, right? It's not a text dependent question. And one of the things that you're going to see in this lesson plan is there are a lot of questions that aren't text dependent. So that's a concern about using ChatGPT or AI for interactive read aloud lesson plans. Another area is the introduce key vocabulary. These are the three key vocabulary words that were chosen. And if you know the book, like this isn't, I don't even think this is in the book, this word. And it's just not the place that if you were going to teach transformation, it's not where you would probably teach it. So the choices of vocabulary were concerning. And then some of the things about, here's another non-text dependent question. And then if you move on toward the end here, this is a pretty good question, I have to say. I mean, there are some good questions in here, but there are a number that don't match what you've learned in your professional learning about effective comments and questioning in interactive read alouds. And then this really got me here, having the kids do this little chant, wish with care, think it through, magic's tricky, that's the clue. I think, that it's not a use of, it's not a use of time that we would say would really deeply support comprehension development. Again, there's some decent stuff in here. I mean, keep your tone of voice animated as you read dialogue. 100%. There's actually research showing that supports comprehension. So, I mean, some of the stuff in here is good, but some of it is not good. And so, to get back to the slides, I don't know if I'm all right there. Yes. So to get back to the slides, my answer is somewhere between tell teachers don't do it, or you highly recommend that they don't do it, or if you do it, like change a lot. Like you'd have to really revise that lesson plan for that to be a decent Sylvester and the Magic Pebble lesson plan. And here indeed is the link that I said I'd provide to that thing so that you can see for yourself some of the problematic aspects of it. Okay, last question. You do have to be impressed with my timing though, right? It's 7:13, 10:13 your time, and I have to end in 2 minutes, and I'm on the last question. It's pretty good, right? Anyway, I don't have much going for me, but I do seem to have the timing right. Okay, so what are some good curriculum materials to use with young fives? And then you fly is a specific question. So I do want to just quickly share with you young fives in Michigan these days, which is also begindergarten, developmental kindergarten, transitional. There's so many different names for this these days. Has been a subject of some research. And if you haven't seen this research, I thought you might be interested. We're so lucky that we have a research group at University of Michigan that has done multiple papers on transitional kindergarten in our state. If you want to check them out, they're here and here. The links are in the slide deck. The very short answer is that transitional kindergarten is looking really good in terms of improving children's trajectories and outcomes. So that's really exciting. So when you're looking at curricula for transitional kindergarten, one of the things you really want to look for is continuity, from pre-K to K, or and to some degree, pre-K to TK. Remember that TK, transitional kindergarten in this state at this point for almost all of you is pre-K, in the sense that everybody's going to kindergarten the next year. So it's pre-kindergarten, it's before kindergarten. In the old days, some of you might remember that when we first started having developmental or junior kindergarten or other kinds of programs in Michigan, sometimes districts would decide during that year whether to move the children up to first grade for the next year or to move them for K for the next year. But what I'm seeing in the state now, and I've verified with this a few people, is almost everywhere, everybody in TK is going to K. Nobody's going to first. And so you're looking for a curriculum that doesn't duplicate your kindergarten. You're looking for a pre-kindergarten curriculum, right? But one that's going to rigorously prepare kids for K. Beyond that, use what you know about curriculum selection at any age or grade level. So at any age or grade level, we've been over this many times in the network over the years. I'm sure the team can dig up some slides for you, but we're looking for things like, has it been tested in research? If it hasn't been tested in research, is it aligned with research? Were researchers involved writing the curriculum? Does it align to the literacy essentials? So if you look at the essentials and you look at the curriculum, do they line up? Or are there things in the curriculum that we have, gone over as not effective, or things in the curriculum that are missing that we know are effective? And I can't help but finish by just saying, I'm not endorsing yet, but for those of you who are in metropolitan areas in Michigan and have classrooms with a number of children from historically underrepresented racial and ethnic groups, our Great First Aid pre-K OER curriculum, OER meaning, open access, the curriculum is free, is being released on February 28th. So if you're interested in that, please check us out at greatfirstaid.org. But regardless, please make sure you use what you know about curriculum selection at any age and grade level to select your curriculum. Okay. All right, that's it for me. And thank you all so much, and have a wonderful rest of the day.